God needed to change the world so the gospel could quickly spread to all the nations. He selected the most unlikely boy to change the world. He had so many things going against him. But God opened doors in front of him that allowed his inner drive to succeed. His name was Octavian. He was born in 63 BC. He was a weak, sickly boy, which went against the Roman idea of the macho male. In addition to that, his father died when he was 4 years old, and his stepfather rejected him. In fact, he was sent off to live with his grandmother, and she's the one that raised him. But that was of God, because his grandmother happened to be the sister of the great Julius Caesar. When Octavian was 17 years old, he had a chance to prove his worth to his great uncle. He decided to join him in his war in Spain. But unfortunately, when it was time to leave, Octavian got one of his sick spells. This sickness lasted his entire life and sometimes would disable him for months at a time. This was one of them. So Caesar just had to leave him. Unfortunately, the people in Rome interpreted his not going as that he was just a coward, didn't want to go. But still, God used this for his glory. When Octavian was finally well enough to get off of his sick bed, still sick, but able to get up and get around, he took a ship and sailed to the front. But along the way, the ship was wrecked at sea. The young man finally made his way to the shore and then had to travel over hostile territory till he finally came to Caesar's camp. Caesar was impressed. He had already won the war, but this young man didn't know that. Far as he knew, he was walking into an enemy camp and would have been killed. He honored the young man by even allowing him to ride in his chariot, which is a place of honor. While he was in that Spanish camp, he met a brave warrior by the name of Marcus Agrippa. Later in life, Agrippa would become so famous that parents would name their children after him, and that's how you get the two Agrippas that are found in the Bible, named after this man right here. But at this point in his life, he was just a soldier, and he had a problem. His brother had fought on the opposite side of the war and has now been captured and was going to be executed. He went to Octavian and asked him if he would go to his uncle and plead the case for the brother. Octavian did that. And to the surprise of everyone, Caesar went along with it, which was totally not like him at all. Marcus Agrippa was so grateful that he was loyal to Octavian for the rest of his life. Caesar didn't have an heir. And so he followed a Roman tradition that he could adopt an heir. And he had adopted Mark Antony. But unfortunately for Mark Antony, he had fallen into Caesar's disfavor, and Caesar had exiled him. So Caesar was thinking maybe this nephew of his would be a good substitute for Antony. On the way home from Spain, he decided to make amends with Antony, and so he took a detour and picked him up and took him back to Rome, even allowed him to ride in his chariot, the place of honor. When we got to Rome, he sent Octavian and Marcus Agrippa to another country on an assignment, and while he was gone, he changed his will, taking Mark Antony out and putting Octavian in. More than likely, he would have switched this back again later on. But before he could, he was assassinated. When Mark Antony went to hear the reading of the will, he was shocked to hear that he had been taken out. And this 18-year-old kid was put in his place. He was furious. Octavian knew that this was not a good time to go back to Rome. I mean, there was two things going wrong. I mean, one, the Senate was a part of killing his uncle. And in addition to that, a powerful warrior now hated him. He decided not to go back, and if he hadn't, Mark Antony would have won. But his friend, Marcus Agrippa, told him that it was important for him to go back to Rome and face his enemies, which he did. When he got there, he was amazed at the power he had by inheriting Caesar's name. He was now Caesar Octavian. And he inherited his uncle's vast estate and the legions of soldiers that were loyal to him now. On top of all that, one of the greatest orators of his day stood before the Senate and convinced him that they should side with Octavian. Mark Antony could now do nothing. And yet this rivalry between these two men would go on. It would go back and forth and up and down. Sometimes they were fighting on the same side in a campaign, and sometimes they were fighting each other. In time, they finally came to a conclusion. They would both rule Rome in the two different areas. Octavian would take the west, Mark Antony would take the east. And on top of that, Mark Antony would marry Octavian's sister. This seemed to solve everything, and Mark Antony moved to Egypt. In time, Mark Antony divorced his wife and married Cleopatra, and their 3 children. As time went on, Mark Antony became more and more loyal to Egypt and not so much to Rome. The Senate finally had proof that he was going to actually move the source of power to Egypt. They sent Octavian and Marcus Agrippa to take care of this problem. The two armies met on the battlefield, 200,000 men each. Little did Mark Antony know that God had a purpose for his rival. And it was because of weather that he lost the battle. He went back to Egypt, and in time, he and Cleopatra both committed suicide. This meant that Octavian inherited the entire country of Egypt, which made him one of the most wealthy men in history. And he was 33 years old. After that, he and Marcus Agrippa continued to grow in their power. And now the genius of this young man could shine. Contrary to what other leaders did, he decided to work with the Senate rather than beating them down. In fact, over time, and he slowly gained more and more power, and finally went to the Senate and pretended like he was going to retire. knowing there was no one else that could take over. He knew they would beg him to stay, and they did. When he agreed, they graciously agreed to reward him for staying. They gave him 2 titles. One was first citizen. Basically, that was their way of saying, we know you are now the dictator. And the other one was a title called Augustus, which means illustrious one. And he kept that title for the rest of his life. He was now Caesar Augustus. He continued to expand the empire and gain more and more control and power till finally it was in 27 BC that he rewrote the Constitution of the Roman Republic, and his position ended, and basically ended the Republic after its 500-year history. And he started the Roman Empire, which lasted another 500 years. Even though it took all kinds of wars and bloodshed and battles and conflict to bring him to power, he ushered in a time of peace called the Pax Romana, which basically means Roman peace or imperial peace. And there were no conflicts throughout the empire, except for the expansion. And Caesar did expand the Roman Empire greatly. On top of that, he made peace with the Parthian Empire to the east, which brought about more peace. He then set up a system of taxation. You see, up to this point, Rome had totally lived on the loot that they got from conquering other nations. Caesar set it up so that everybody would contribute to the wealth of Rome. He built more and more roads. Now, he used these roads to move militaries from place to place quickly, which brought peace, because peace was with an iron hand. In addition to that, he set up a standing navy, because the Mediterranean had never known peace because of the pirates. With his strong standing navy, he finally brought peace to the Mediterranean for the first time in its history. The cities had 2 major problems: crime and fires. He set up a police department in the cities and a fire department, which brought peace to the cities. And then, with the help of Marcus Agrippa, he reformed the military. Up to that point, the soldiers had all been loyal to their individual generals. Consequently, these generals could get more and more powerful and finally fight against another general to take control, like Julius Caesar did, and even Octavian did. But now, with these reforms, he set up a pension for veterans and set up help for the wounded and many other reforms, which including paying the soldiers better than their generals could. This brought about loyalty to the Caesar that was greater than the generals. Now the generals couldn't go to battle with one another, which continued to bring peace to the empire. The strange thing about Augustus Caesar was that he wore common clothes. That was a part of the aristocrat Roman society. He did not wear the royal purple or hold symbols of power like the scepter or golden crowns. No, he just dressed like other Romans. Caesar continued to suffer with his illness, different sicknesses, and at one of these times he was sure that he was going to die, and he didn't have an heir. Oh, he had a daughter, but not a male heir. So he followed the example of his adopted father, and he adopted a son. And you can guess it, it was Marcus Agrippa, his trusted friend. To strengthen Agrippa's bloodline, he had him marry his daughter. In time, Caesar got well. And Agrippa took his soldiers and went out on a campaign to a far-off country. And while he was there, he caught a virus and died. This was devastating to Caesar. Augustus not only lost a good, trusted friend, but a valuable partner. He ruled as emperor, he ruled for a total of 40 years, in addition to what he served in the Republic. He died at 76 years old. When Jesus was 18, when he died, the people greatly loved him and revered him, and he was quickly made into a god. Little did he know that he had prepared the way for the gospel. He did this by putting in roads, all kinds of roads all across the empire. He did this to move his soldiers from place to place. God used it to move his soldiers from place to place, and missionaries could quickly go to all parts of Rome or nations far afield. He also established one language, which means these missionaries didn't have to learn different languages. On top of that, even though there were many countries, the borders were not restricted. They could go from country to country at ease. And he brought about stability throughout it was with an iron hand, but it was still stable. On top of all that, Augustus Caesar liked the Jews. Unlike other Caesars, he liked the Jews. Now, it was a law that when all these different nations, they could worship whatever God they wanted to in whatever way they wanted to. There was just one restriction. They couldn't claim that their God was the only God. Well, the Jews believed that their God was the only God. So Augustus Caesar made what was called the Jewish exception. They were the only people who could claim that their God was the only one. This meant the Jews could go anywhere. And they did. They went throughout the Roman Empire and set up communities and built synagogues and taught the local people about the Old Testament, which prepared the way for the gospel. And these synagogues became seeds for churches all over the Roman Empire. Caesar did all of that without knowing it. We celebrate Augustus Caesar every summer. See, July was named after Julius Caesar, but August was named after Augustus Caesar.